everybody. It's Jeff from Ayelet Tours, and since 1986, we've been connecting people to Israel and the Jewish world. We are the official travel partner for Hadassah Missions to Israel. We run trips all over the world with outstanding scholars under the banner of the Traveling University. We happen to have one of them with us this evening. We're looking forward to hearing from Dr. Mendelsohn a little bit later, just in a few moments. We also run trips for Jewish singles and Jewish adults, not particularly scholarly trips, under the banner of Best Day Adventures. And of course, we have been running for many years virtual programs to help connect people beyond just the trips themselves. So thank you one and all for being part of those over the years. And we're very excited to be here together for this week 2 of Scholar-Palooza 2025. This is the second year we've done this. It was such a hit last year. We thought we would do it again, and yet again we've got a return speaker. So this is year 2 for Dr. Mendelsohn coming back to speak in Scholar-Palooza, and we are thrilled to have you and excited to have you back. Well, last you and I saw each other, we were scootering down the streets of Prague past the astronomical clock.
I saw a picture of that. That's right. That was incredible.
Those are good times. So glad to see you at least virtually together again. We're looking forward to this evening's presentation on the Jewish experience in Uzbekistan. You, of course, were just there in preparation for the trip that you'll be leading next May. So once I finish this introduction, we'll turn it over to you. Just a couple reminders to folks out there. Number one, this is a recorded session. So if you'd like to share it with others, if you'd like to watch it over again and again, we will be posting it to our YouTube channel later in the week, and we'll send out a reminder to let people know when that is done. But if you're here with us September 9th, 2025, live, and watching this and would like to participate, we would love that. If you would participate, how can you do so? Well, this is a webinar. You can post your questions in the Q&A function. We will get to as many of those as we possibly can after the formal presentation. And with that little bit of introduction, Dr. David Mendelsohn, thank you for joining us. Normally you're in Israel. We made it easy for you. You happen to be in the States now. So thank you.
Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
South Carolina, beautiful. So thank you for taking the time to be with us. And for this evening's presentation, I will turn it over to
you. Thank you, Jeff. So hello, everybody. It's great to not see anybody at all. And I mean, I wish I could see you all. This webinar format is still a little bit strange for me. Let me start by saying that these the preparatory trips that I do are incredibly important and fascinating. But one of the tricks that I do to get to know the different cultures, for instance, when I spent quite a few months preparing for let's say my doctoral dissertation, and I had to get to know Arabic dialects in different places, like in a Druze village, in Bir Zayt or Ramallah, in Israeli Arab villages. And what I would do is I would teach wrestling. In Canada, I was a wrestling champion, and in Israel, I continued. So I would teach wrestling to the children. And when I started the trip, because I'm also going to lead a trip at the end of Uzbekistan, I also ended up in Kyrgyzstan for a while. And so I was watching this beautiful ceremony, actually, of a bard singing the tradition, the Epic of Manas. It's this huge epic that's longer than the Iliad and the Odyssey put together, and he knew it all by heart. It just so happened that I stumbled upon the military in the middle of the steppes of Kyrgyzstan, who were preparing for the nomadic games. They're held every 2 years from all these different nomadic tribes. And the military sent their representative bard to sing the Epic of Manas. And then when I looked outside, I saw a young boy wrestling an older gentleman. And I said to the boy, "You want to wrestle?" He's like, "No, no, no." Next thing I know, he pulls over the local military wrestling champion, who is the representative for their games, and he wanted to wrestle with me. So I ended up wrestling with him. So it was, and then of course they thought that was funny, and I ended up getting much closer to the tribe, and I ended up getting all these incredible connections for both Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. I ended up in people's families. I have this rule that you haven't really traveled somewhere until you've ended up in someone's kitchen. That's a different story. Anyway, today, first I'll show you a little bit of those 2 slides of what the bard looked like, and then what the and then what the rest of them look like. And then I'm going to get into our tale of Uzbekistan and the Jews of not just the Jews of Uzbekistan, how the Jews ended up there, and what made them up as a culture, as a people, and how we, as all Jews, are so interconnected with the story. It's part of our story too. It's not something separate, an interesting story to know about. It's us, and I hope to make this point throughout our talk today. Let's see if I can start my share now. All right, let me see if I can go down now. Here we go. Okay, here. So here's the bard. I'm not gonna if you can't hear the sound, I'm just gonna play it.
Nah, the sound, it's like a little broken up. It's a little hard to hear the sound.
Thank you, Jeff. But what's important about this, about the guy, is that you have to understand, we must understand that in the tradition of the nomadic peoples, and this included the Arab people, the people of the steppes, the nomads of the steppes, and even the Greeks who were not nomads, they believed in the idea of the contest, the agon, where the word it's a Greek word meaning a test that takes every part of your being, every concentration. And if it was a competition of oral poetry, that was as important as an athletic contest. And that's where we get the word actually in English, agony. So it was amazing for me to watch, first of all, this bard and hear him, and I was saying, and it really brought together the tradition of the Arab world, the Greek world, the nomadic peoples, and again, you're going to see as I continue speaking the whole issue of the Jewish people, how interconnected we are with all these cultures, what we've taken from them, what we've left behind, what we've integrated, what we've acculturated. And then the next thing I'll show you very quickly is this: with the wrestler, where they set me up with a match just for fun. You can see and you see all the military coming over. I thought it was just for fun. Next thing I know, at the end of the match, we fought for a good 15, 20 minutes. Next thing I knew was that there was all these soldiers were surrounding me. And so, yeah, and then of course I ended up going by the sea, and that was just a brief interview. That's at the end of the Uzbekistan trip, basically, is this trip to Kyrgyzstan, which is fascinating in its own right. The history of the Jews of Kyrgyzstan has its own story, and it's all, as I said, all interrelated with this concept of the Silk Road, which we're going to be getting into in just a moment. So we Jews, I guess, of the 20th, 21st century, we're very curious and we're very interested in our identity and who we are. But somewhat surprisingly, what I found over the last few decades, a couple of decades, is that we're not as interested in why we are the way we are. In other words, about our history, and also how very recent a gift it is that we've been allowed to entertain an identity that's based on equality of rights, of equality to all of the humans. We have always, as Jews, as far back as we can remember, have lived under monarchies, under an absolute authority, and we've had to adapt and survive. And what makes us unique in many ways is we have this portable culture and DNA based on the fact that we were once a temple society. We had our own temple. And of course, I don't have to belabor the point. And we carried our culture with us via the Torah and the Talmud. It's impossible to understand the Jews of Uzbekistan or in much of our own Jewish story of exile, immigration, exploration, travel, and of course, business and trade without understanding a concept known as the Silk Road. Why do I call it a concept and not a geographic and historical fact? When I say the Silk Road, I want you to envision that it is an idea rather than this historical event. The Silk Road, you can say, was just a trade route, but does just a trade route really exist? Trade, of course, gave us the alphabet via the Phoenicians. Trade, of course, gave us science, astronomy, architecture, and a diffusion of ideas. So we got this. If you look at the map, you can see it. Trade gave us via Islam. In fact, if you think of Islam, think about the Quran itself. You might not have read the Quran, but if you did read it, it echoes the Old Testament, the Talmud, the Greek philosophy, all kinds of historical events. And they, of course, if you look at that, they came from Mecca, which was itself a major hub in the trade route of the Silk Road. So the Silk Road wasn't, as you see here, a single path, But it was this incredible network of land and sea trade that connected like the East and the West for about over 1,500 years, to the mid 15th century Common Era. So it goes all the way back because it's why is it the Silk Road? It goes back to the Chinese Han Dynasty. And what did it trade? Of course, we're going to talk about it in a moment. Of course, silk, spices, gold, but as I've been believing, also ideas, religions, technologies, and unfortunately, even diseases all across Eurasia. So this idea, the concept of the Silk Road, refers to this vast web of connections. So, and it continued between all these different civilizations until eventually the Ottoman Empire created this blockade of land routes. And of course, the rise of maritime trade routes led to the decline. So it's just keep this in mind. And I want you and today we're going to be talking a little bit, quite a bit, about the territory of modern day Uzbekistan, which was centrally located, if you look here, along the Silk Road. And it itself was this crossroads and an incredible hub for culture and intellectual trade between the East and the West. So this area that we're going to be looking at, which was the hub of what we call it Uzbekistan, then it was Maranahar. It became very prosperous, and it ended up becoming very, very sophisticated urban culture, which was rife with science, philosophy, rich in an incredible intersectionality of cultures and ideas, which is ironic because Uzbekistan itself, even then, was this landlocked country in South Central Asia. So we're going to be looking together. We're going to be exploring those. We come from Samarkand and Bukhara, and these trade routes from China met these other areas. They had rest areas. They had caravan stops, and you have all of these commerce, culture, diverse populations coming together for well over 1,005 years. So to give us a brief idea. So why do we call it the Silk Road? This is actually a really important for us to go into a bit into the origins of what we mean when we say the Silk Road. So we've heard a lot about the domestication of cows, of sheep, of camels, of horses. We don't talk so much about the domestication of insects. But so in fact, the Silk Road is named after this moth, this Bombyx moth that was basically through the centuries became the major central part of the silk trade on every level. And as you will see, it also became it had a crucial impact on the development and the history of the Jews all over the areas where the Silk Road traveled. We became incredibly intertwined with the whole idea of the Silk Road. So imagine around 7,500 years ago. So we had horses were still wild, and let's imagine the turkeys were also wild going around North Americas. And at that time, this tree called the mulberry tree, people noticed these little caterpillars that we call silkworms. They were taken off the mulberry bushes, and they say that the legend goes in China that a silkworm's cocoon fell into by the name of Lei Zhu, fell into her teacup. And she plucked it out. Hot tea loosened the fibers, and she started to unwind the beautiful soft thread, which unwound into one beautiful, strong thread around her fingers. And so she learned. And this is when they say this is the legend of how it was discovered. So these are court ladies. I wrote it here. The court ladies are preparing this newly woven silk Chinese they're this beautiful silk. It's a Chinese painting also on silk in the early 12th century. And for the longest time, for many hundreds of years, they guarded their secret jealously. Nobody could ever find out how they did it. And so China ruled, and everybody was going crazy for this incredibly soft fabric, and they couldn't figure out how it was made, who made it, where it came from. And they say that around 552 Common Era, the Byzantine Emperor Justinian I sent two monks two agents basically to figure out what was going on. And the story goes, and apparently it has its elements in truth. They figured out the secret. They understood they found out about the cocoons and the eggs. But the customs agents would search you in China every time you left the city. So these two monks hid the eggs of the silkworm inside their bamboo walking sticks, and they managed to sneak out, and they brought it to Constantinople, and the Byzantine Empire was able to start its own silkworm industry, and that definitely happened at that time period. The story probably has some element of truth to it, and it shattered China's monopoly, and they made silk accessible to the West. And as I told you, this story is crucial to our story because it enriched the lives of many, many different Jewish populations in Greece, in the area of Constantinople. You can basically examine Jewish populations everywhere. In China, they became also famous for their dyeing, the way they dyed the silks. And so that's a story that I wanted you to know, to understand. And there's an earlier legend around the 5th century Common Era that talks about how an area of Khotan, which is also not too far from Bukhara, where a Chinese princess was supposed to marry the king, and she decided to bring as a present to bring the secret of silk to him, and she smuggled the silkworm eggs and the seeds of the mulberry tree, because you needed the leaves, in her hairpiece, and guards couldn't search a princess. So she managed to bring it to her husband, and this kingdom of Khotan actually also became the only other place that was known for its silk. So I thought these were fun stories for you to know, and also to understand the incredible importance that silk held in this world. So the Jews themselves learned about silk production called sericulture, also in China, and they brought their art all over to the Near East, to the Levant. And then eventually, along with the Byzantine discovery of how to make it themselves, the Jews brought their know-how from China. And so you have eventually the Jews totally intermingled with this rise of the silk of working of silk with the Romans, the Byzantines, and even the Norman Crusader Roger II, I believe. They employed Jewish experts in silk to bring this to basically make this an incredible and central part of their own economies. So you have this is actually a Jewish-owned silk dyeing factory in France in 1751, and they've been so you have them. Imagine this. So not only do we have the Silk Road itself, where Jews traveled, sold, took ideas along with the commerce, brought them back and forth to all other Jewish populations, basically creating a giant network of Jewish people all over. They always were housed at each other's homes, and along with bringing this expertise. So in Muslim Spain, we'll learn later, Jews were also active in their silk industry, and you're going to hear stories of how in Greece, in Thessaloniki, they were known. They provided all the Ottoman soldiers, the Jassamiris, with their silk uniforms as well. So just to understand how integrated we were. But for the purposes of this at this point of the lecture, espionage is centuries away. Chinese silk is now at this point still the dominant product of only of China. So how did the Jews themselves reach Uzbekistan at this time period and come to settle there? So for this point of the lecture, I want you to look at this clay tablet inscription that tells the story of the conquest of Yerushalayim, of Jerusalem, by Nebuchadnezzar II, and the surrender of Yehoiakim in about 597. We should have added in either BCE. So many of you might have seen this. This is a sketch of a painting of Yirmiyahu, of the prophet Jeremiah, reflecting on Jerusalem's destruction. So you have the destruction of Jerusalem. You see the scene filled with despair. You have the prophet seated among all the mourners in the rubble, seeing the aftermath of the city's collapse. So this is where this period of and their exile to Babylon, and this exile to Babylon, or Babylonian captivity, brought the Judeans from their homeland into the Babylonian Empire, and of course in 587 BCE, I believe that's the time when you actually have them all coming in waves. And this event, which ended our own Jewish sovereignty in the area of Jerusalem, it leads to the beginnings of our Jewish diaspora, who we are today, and this lasting religious and cultural transformation that happened in Babylon, including the development of synagogues, and of course our ability, our what I call our cultural DNA, our portable cultural DNA, is that emphasize prayer in place of temple sacrifices, emphasize the bringing of our Torah to different places, and of course the concept of the Talmud that was developed there. It created a whole new idea of Judaism, and in many ways it is not in many ways it is who we are today. So the Jewish community that I'm speaking about in Central Asia is probably the oldest, one of the oldest, if not the oldest, of the diaspora groups that we know of, with historians tracing this period. And as we know, they spent quite a bit of time in there uh, until Cyrus the Great, actually in 538 BCE, allowed Jews to return from Babylonian captivity. But what happened in that time while they were in Babylon? This is what I want to talk to you about. So after they were allowed, the Jews were, so we'll speak about that in a moment. But the Jews, after their release, many of them, instead of going back, they chose to settle in different parts of the Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great, including what is now Uzbekistan, and of course the city Bukhara. And so, and this is also the point. People always think of the Jews as our exposure to Hellenism, as having giving us this ability under Rambam later on to talk about philosophy, science, rationality, as not just as opposed, but as part of the whole experience of what it means to be the whole Jewish experience. But but this actually began for the Jewish people in Babylon. Here I like this depiction of Rabbi Ashi. If you know Rabbi Ashi and Ravina compiled the whole Babylonian Talmud while they were there. The Jews in Babylon, what happened to them? They actually engaged with the locals in this process of cultural exchange. But rather than assimilating, they actually selectively adopted and adapted aspects of Babylonian culture, which while they continued developing their own religious and intellectual traditions along with the Talmud. And it's kind of a cross pollination, what I really like to call acculturation versus assimilation. So so they so Judaism essentially is reshaped, and again this is crucial for our understanding of ourselves, along with the Jews of Uzbekistan. So in the absence of the temple, of course their focus shifts from their Kohanim, from the rituals, from the priestly rituals, to studying the texts and developing all kinds of practices, what we do together as a community. So, so of course we have so with that part we know of. What we might, and this concept of studying scripture intensely, focusing on the written word. This is where we really become people of the book. The temple is gone, and so the religious authority has now shifted from the priests to scribes, to soferim, and scholars who become these interpreters of the law. So we have, so that's the Jewish side of it. What was the outside influence? One of the biggest ones was actually the influence of the Zoroastrian religion. And many scholars believe that the Jews there absorbed Zoroastrian, the religion of Zoroastrianism, which actually contains the elements of angels, demons, and Satan as the adversarial figure to the good figure of God, which also became incorporated into Jewish theology. We have the development of the synagogue. These are all ideas that were not just brought back to Israel, not just brought back to Jerusalem in this area for the second temple. It was started being exported with Jewish communities all over Persia. You have to understand it was not something that became just part of the people of Israel coming back to their homeland. This became a part of the Jewish people who were continuing along the Silk Road. I want you to keep this in mind. This is why the development of the synagogue is so important. It became an ability where Jews can come together and create a local gathering place for prayer, study, and assembly, creating the idea of a school of study, a yeshiva. And this became and this was basically the part of our reality. Another thing that happened is we made it for the first time, perhaps, we made the shift from a people of believers that followed our Torah as and followed the laws of Moses and went to the temple. Suddenly, we started thinking in a different way. We started using this kind of critical knowledge that profoundly reshaped our Judaism long before Hellenism. So we don't have the Jerusalem temple. So they start actually looking at um, they start examining different types of theologies. This is, of course, when they picked up the Zoroastrian ideas we spoke about, but they also picked up astronomy. They they looked at the stars and they started to understand the changing under the zodiac, how the stars change, how the seasons change, how to plot for them. These were, and it allowed them. And this is also when you have traditions like the Sabbath becoming really cemented, dietary laws, and language and writing, of course. So you have Jews learning Aramaic, and they changed the old Paleo Hebrew text, which you might know from perhaps either from the Samaritan Torah, or if you know your very old Paleo Hebrew, you might recognize those symbols. They changed that and adapted to the Aramaic script, which we use until today. And they, of course, adopt the Babylonian calendar. What we call the Jewish calendar is filled with the names of Babylonian gods, Nisan, Tammuz, etc. And they're recorded in the Talmud, and the Talmud explicitly states this comes from Babylon. So you have aspects of civil law, like the laws of Hammurabi, ayin tachat ayin, an eye for an eye. Suddenly you have the idea of, well, it doesn't have to actually be an eye for an eye, it can be monetary value. These are the laws of Hammurabi, the idea of mitigating circumstances. This also gets integrated into Jewish thought and legal thought. So I wanted you to realize these are the growths of academies. So these are all ideas. I just want to show you a couple of images of an ossuary. This is has a relief of Zoroastrian priests attending a fire, and I love the influence of the struggle between good and evil, between light and darkness. And Havdalah, we actually do a lot of Zoroastrian themed prayers. The Ben Choshech le'or, between light and darkness, between the sacred and the holy, etc. And Zoroastrian, of course, focuses always on this cosmic battle. And you see this in Uzbekistan. So I basically, this is of course the famous Cyrus cylinder, the Cyrus the Great, when he actually allows the Jews to go free and return and migrate elsewhere and return to their homeland. And I wanted you here to think about. We started with the Silk Road. I want you to understand what it means for Cyrus the Great, what he did. He took many different nomadic peoples under the Persian Empire, and unified them and created, in less than 15 years, this incredible empire that lasted for centuries. Why does this happen, and how do these empires fall is another story for another lecture, which I would love to give you one day. But when it's an interesting pattern we're going to see repeatedly. We're going to see continuously repeated. Nomadic tribes get organized by a leader into an empire that lasts for centuries. So Cyrus the Great does it. Can you think of someone else who does it? Muhammad in the spread of Islam. Look at this again. I want you to recognize the pattern. Remember, we're looking at the Silk Road. Here we have the spread of Islam. So we have in 570 Common Era, Muhammad is born. And Islam is when he was 40 years old, in 610, when he has his first revelation as a prophet, Islam is born. And the difference with Islam versus Christianity and Judaism is that Islam is born into a world that already has Greek philosophy, Hellenism. You have, look around you. We have these amazingly developed civilizations. We have China, we have Abyssinia, we have Persia, we have Greece. Imagine how it is for the Arab people who are in some ways have enriched themselves because of the Silk Road, but they're still a largely nomadic people, many of them pagan, some are Jewish, some are Christian, but some are Zoroastrian, but they cannot unify as a people. They're patriarchal, Arabic speaking, intensely loyal to their individual tribe leaders, and they needed a single leader to come along and actually unify them in a common cause to be able to, in any way, compete with it. Even though they were a large, numerous people, nothing could unify them. So, despite the fact that their unique position, look at where they are in Mecca. Mecca was a source of fresh water, and you had all of the ideas we've been speaking about now. Remember, all of these um, Persian ideas with philosophy and astronomy and science, the Greeks even more, who invented democracy, who invented a true distancing themselves from religion and looking at things dispassionately. You have all of these ideas coming into Mecca, and you have all the stories of the Jews, of the Christians, and this is a place where if you are not a practicing Muslim, you can understand how an intelligent fellow like Muhammad, who was a traitor, he himself, remember, think the Silk Road, he was a traitor. He was influenced by all these ideas. He heard them all. And if you read the Quran, all the ideas come out again. You have all these different elements, Alexander the Great, everything who exported Hellenism, it's all contained in the Quran. It's basically another reflection of the Silk Road. I want to really stress this point. So here we have. I want you to get this idea. We have the deserts and the steppes, and we have the wandering of the Silk Road. We have the nomads of Arabia, and here we have this map of the Arab world in the time of Muhammad. He was born, as I said, in 570 AD. Look at the location. Look at the areas around the Arabian Peninsula. I want you to see it in the map. You have the Byzantine Empire to your upper left. You have the Sassanid, the Persian Empire to your right. You have the Byzantine Empire again to your middle left, and you have Abyssinia, which is basically the Ethiopians. All of them successful, and then mix all these discoveries and inventions of the Greeks, as I just said before, all of these flourishing realities, and suddenly we find ourselves with this great intersection of culture and possibilities. And Muhammad takes these ideas, spreads the message of his revelations, called it Islam, which means surrender to the one God. He tells all of the local chieftains, we can unify ourselves under this message if you will just leave your tribal squabbling aside, uh, basically convert to Islam, and let's become a nation. And this is basically the birth of Islam. And within 100 years of his revelation, look what happens. He reaches, he starts the conquering, spreads everywhere. The reason why I'm telling you this story is to understand that the Jews now have had the influence in Babylon. Now you have this early spread of Islam, and Islam, because it's a new religion, it doesn't have any issues with accepting Hellenism, which was so harshly rejected by the Maccabees and by the Jews in general at an earlier time period. They accept all the ideas that the pre-Socratic philosophers, the Socratic philosophers, and they almost worship them. Aristotle and Plato and Socrates are held in high esteem by the Muslims, and as Islam expands in places like Baghdad, they set up schools of translation in which they bring back all of these philosophers, and basically physicians like uh, Galen, Hippocrates, and they start translating everything from all these different languages into Arabic. And by the way, Jewish people help with the translations as well. They're multilingual. So you have a house of learning set up in Baghdad. And so the early spread of Islam, when you talk about the Golden Age, the reason they call it the Golden Age is because these ideas were exported along with it. So it was a time of science. It was a time of not so much worrying about being insular and worrying about preserving your ideals and faith versus the corruption of the outside world. It was a time where they were dominant. They didn't take challenges. It didn't worry them too much. In another lecture, you'll see there was depictions of Muhammad that were often freely drawn and distributed. It was a different time period, a different way of thinking. So here you have a 12th century Arabic manuscript showing Socrates with his students, and you have this Islamic philosophy beginning in the 9th century and just continuing until the end of the 12th century. It's known as the Islamic Golden Age. And again, remember, the reason why we're stressing this is not a history lesson. Jews were part of all these aspects we're speaking about. And by virtue, I believe, of the fact that we were a minority and we were not able to be dominant in our own way, we quietly started absorbing all of these ideas and assimilating, I would say, as I said before, acculturating in many ways. And and so when you are just a regular Jew growing up in your home in America and England and Canada and Israel, you are a legitimate inheritor of all of these different exposures. You have to understand that when we're raised, it's part of, as I use the word DNA, it's part of our cultural DNA. It's unusual. And the reason, and so it's not about the Islamic Empire, it's not about Cyrus the Great, it's not about the Silk Road, it's about the fact that we grew up along with all of this. And many times the people who survive and the ones who benefit the greatest are not the rulers. It's the ones who actually are kind of who get to survive by almost being ignored, by being despised, by being pushed aside, but not wiped out. By the fact that Jews were the people of the book, the Muslims were not allowed to actually kill them for not converting. They had to suffer them in second-class status known as the dhimmi. And in the Golden Age, the dhimmi, second-class status, which was also granted to the Christians, meant that you could rise very high. You could rise up to the point of being the chief advisor of the king or the sultan, which happened frequently. Those were in the good times. There were bad times, as you will see. So here's just some depictions of the scientists bringing their ideas around the world. Here's Plato with his students. And I wanted you to take a look now at one of the greatest thinkers. As these Greek ideas are adopted by Arab Muslims, or not only Arab anymore, Muslims in general, this fellow by the name of Al-Kindi becomes recognized as the father of Islamic or Arabic philosophy. So Al-Kindi believed that you could accept the Quran and the sacred texts and also examine and compare it with the Greek ideas and arrive at deeper truths. And Al-Kindi would say if there's an impasse, if there's any kind of point of where there's a clash, you should abandon the Greek idea in favor of the Islamic position. And Al-Kindi is extremely important because he's one of these Islamic philosophers who have, remember, I want you to realize they have received their learning via the Greek philosophers with a great deal of respect and interest. And I talked to you about the fact that Jews were also instrumental in translating a lot of these works. Jews are also interested in Hellenism in their own way, in Islamic philosophy as funneled through Islamic philosophy, and they've received, as I said, the other aspect through the Babylonian wisdom, and here's Al-Kindi actually in charge of the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, which also employed Jews. And look at them; they're working with this is an ancient this is a very early depiction of them working with astrolabes, with compasses. They're working math, and Al-Kindi writes hundreds of treatises of his own on ethics, logic, psychology, medicine, pharmacology, mathematics, astronomy, astrology. He wrote about perfumes. I can't even go on. It's just he was earthquakes, meteorology. So he even brought in Indian numerals to the Islamic and Christian world. So I just to make you this is his manuscript on deciphering cryptographic messages. So this Al-Kindi and several other philosophers, I won't go into all of them, but the one I want to really stress now is this fellow by the name of Ibn Sina or Avicenna of Bukhara, the area of modern-day Uzbekistan. Ibn Sina was a Persian philosopher, fluent in Arabic as well. He was born near Bukhara, Uzbekistan, modern-day Uzbekistan, in 980 Common Era. So he's most famous for his medical encyclopedia called the Canon of Medicine, and it became the standard textbook used in all European universities as well until the 17th century. In fact, many credit him with founding the idea of medical school. He created a madrasa where people had to come and look up. It was a hospital, have to look after patients. They would trail after them the way they do in modern times. He would ask people, his students, what diseases they had, how they were best treated. Here is Ibn Sina actually examining a piece of a sprig of basil, and he wrote extensively on philosophy, and especially talking about Aristotelian thought within the Islamic world. And what's most important about him, not most, but in terms of being Jewish, is when he died, his ideas continued to be taught, expanded upon, resisted, incorporated. And 100 years later, when Maimonides was born in Spain, he is perhaps one of the greatest influences on Rambam's Guide to the Perplexed and his further treatises as well. When Judaism, in many ways, was in danger of becoming an abandoned religion, because think of it, in the Islamic Golden Age, all you have to do to become a Muslim and join in wholeheartedly and gain every aspect that can be given to you and, as a citizen is to say there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger 3 times, and you're fully accepted. So when Maimonides came along and said we can also have our own rational religion, we don't have to just be backwards. We can also question things and look deeper into textual meanings and examine them. When he started doing this and writing about it, he was treated as a heretic by many rabbis. But in many ways, he's seen as a savior of Judaism. It allowed people an alternative, as it allowed them and so this Ibn Sina of Bukhara, Uzbekistan, is incredibly important to us as well. And so this is, by the way, these are the paintings you're going to see all over Uzbekistan when we go there. It's beautiful paintings done often with the hair of a camel or a hair of a horse, exquisite. And again, just another element of I wanted to show you Rambam as well. I actually want to make the point, by the way. So of course um, the point I want to make here actually was that not all the great Islamic philosophers have been Muslim. So we have to stress that for Muslims and Arabs in general, Maimonides is also theirs. He's a product of the Golden Age, and his achievements are also part of their own lineage. So it's here that I wanted to show you this intersection between the Jews and the Silk Road, and all the ideas and cultures which we've been studying come together. Look at Bukhara's strategic position on the Silk Road. It allowed these Jewish merchants and artisans to flourish. So we have, as I said, the weavers of silk, dyers. They start rebuilding Jewish weavers and dyers. They were instrumental in helping rebuild Central Asia, and they started to dominate all the region's textile and dyeing for centuries. So here's a point which I'd like to introduce you to a name, a name I don't think you might not, many of you have not heard before. They're called the Radhanites, Radhanite. Radhanites. They were this medieval network of Jewish merchants. They were active between the 8th and 11th centuries, and they controlled all of these trade routes we've been speaking about: Europe, North Africa, Middle East, Central Asia, parts of India and China as well. And they were the ones that would transport all these luxury goods, spices, silks, and unfortunately slaves. And they were kind of these cultural and economic intermediaries, especially important because they were the bridge between the Christian and Islamic world. And you have a famous writer, geographer by the name of Ibn Khordadbeh, I think I have him on the next slide, who actually who explains how this is him right here actually, how important the Radhanites were in terms of being the bridge between these worlds. And so just I want you to imagine this incredible, and of course they reach Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, and this is where the Jewish communities start to rise and flourish, and they are seen as extremely important. You're going to see this in everywhere we study about the Jewish people, their ease and their facility with many languages, and the fact that they can reach other Jewish communities everywhere they go, they themselves were essentially a conduit for ideas, for trade, for passing along of letters, messages, And because they didn't officially belong to any empire, they were kind of fluid between all of them. They didn't belong to anyone. So they were seen almost as neutral. They brought in messages, income, and so they this was kind of a time period where Jews had kind of invented neutrality almost before the Swiss thought of it. So I don't nobody really knows where the actual Radhanites first came from, but some scholars say they came from Western Europe in the Rhine area, which would give us an Ashkenazi origin. Others say they're Persian origin because the name Radhanite can also mean way or path. We don't really know. Others say that they came from southern Iraq, but we do know that that when we're speaking about Uzbekistan, they are probably one of the most important conduits for all of the ideas we're speaking about. And you see this growth of the Jewish communities happening in cities like Bukhara and uh, Samarkand. And Bukhara itself was once this was one of the major focal points of the Silk Road. It was the powerhouse of Islamic learning because we see Ibn Sina, Avicenna developed his ideas there, and he was born and raised and educated. It was also the capital of the world's oldest Jewish communities that survived all of these centuries of persecution and are still number just a few hundred. And most of them, unfortunately, it's facing gradual, I won't call it extinction, but as a result of their moving to Israel and the US, mainly New York, the numbers have shrunk dramatically. Here you have a picture, by the way, of a Sufi scholar sitting. He's a beggar because that's his chosen way, lying under a pomegranate tree with birds. I actually took this photograph when I was there. I thought it was very beautiful. So here's a depiction in Bukhara of these locals. So I took this photo myself just a few weeks ago of Avraham Yosef, the local chazan, and this is in Bukhara. I stayed with him. He introduced me to many other Bukharan Jews and spoke a lot of their history. He's a beautiful singer as well, and he told me that he's the one who gave me these numbers. I verified them, and they're more or less correct. Less than 500 Bukharan Jews now live in Uzbekistan, and he says about 100,000 live in Israel, and in Bukhara itself, the city, there's about 100 that live there now. And the community sees now, he says, more deaths and funerals than births or weddings. So in the 1970s, this Bukhara Jewish population was at its highest. It was about 40,000, and this is of course when it was under Soviet control. But it's in 1972 when the Soviet authorities started allowing Jews to repatriate to Israel. You actually see there's just a large movement. They start moving, and this is when you gradually see the whole, unfortunately or fortunately, this whole, because Israel, of course, gained, you see this vibrant power, this fascinating community starting to actually disappear from where it was actually lived, thrived, persecuted, thrived over the generations. So Soviet archaeologists actually say they found they don't say, we know they found evidence of 2,200-year-old synagogues in the area of actually Turkmenistan. So it actually again proved further this idea that they arrived in Central Asia in some point around in the BCEs. They say they arrived around 500 BCE, as we know. So the uh, the Jews themselves of Bukhara have their own dialect, which is a mix of Persian and Hebrew, and they used actually the Hebrew alphabet to write these beautiful poems that blend these Persian poetry with biblical themes. Lots of Tehillim, lots of piyutim, sorry, about Jewish martyrs. I don't like to use that word, but Jewish people who were killed after refusing to convert to Islam. And one moment, we're gonna. So I have another slide I want to show you. So I don't want to show you this fast. This is the kind of stuff you'd see them write. Here you have Queen Esther entertaining the king in the presence of the courtiers. And when the golden age of Islam actually passed, you have in the 16th century uh, the Sunni dynasties had previously been relatively kind and relatively tolerant. The Shiite dynasties started to isolate the Bukhara Jews from other Jewish communities, and this is where you actually hear stories about about the cruelty that the Jews had to endure. They uh, they were they were actually when they were Jews actually are and Christians as dhimmis, as a second class citizens, are forced to pay a tax to the Muslim authorities known as the jizya. At this time period, when they would collect it, the kalontar, the collector, actually would actually ritually slap the Jewish community leaders after collecting their taxes. Jews now suddenly, for the first time, having been the masters of the silk of the silk trade, they're prohibited from wearing silk and riding horses. And for the first time, they actually get set up and forced to live in ghettos. So and even those Jews that are so miserable that they decide to convert, uh, they are considered chala, neither this nor that. That's what it means in Persian, and they're mistrusted by both. It was a very miserable time, and so in um, in the 1800s, actually 1790s, a Sephardic rabbi who arrived writes about the fact that these about the that the Jewish traditions were actually neglected, and he's noticed that the copies of the Torah were missing parts. He actually opened the yeshiva, Yosef Maimon, and he convinced the Jews to switch from the Bukharian traditions to a Sephardic tradition. A bit later on, Tsarist Russia annexes the land, and the Jews of Bukhara, like in many cases, they accept the Tsar as for new rulers, and they benefited from it at first. And suddenly, for the first time in generations, they could live where they wanted again. They didn't have to pay the same tax burden as before. They could build new synagogues, and they could start trading again. Um, and Chala Jews, those that were forcibly converted, actually returned to Judaism. So, and in 1917, in the Bolshevik Revolution, they actually helped Moscow root what they called like this the backwards Muslim way of life. So it's so they you can see they've always been active in one way or another. But the Communist Party, as we know, wasn't particularly grateful. And in the 1920s, thousands of Jews were forced to actually leave. And so some crossed into Afghanistan or Iran. And many of them at this time started coming to British administrated Palestine. Bukhara's Shul, 13 synagogues were closed. Torah scrolls were confiscated. Rabbis were persecuted again. And you have the whole story of Jews under communism happening. And I spoke to you a bit later about um, about the Soviets in 72 or 73 allowing Jews to start to move elsewhere. But mainly when Uzbekistan itself declared independence in 1991, you have two things happen. You have emigration to Israel and the US intensified. At the same time, you have Jewish organizations coming to support and help the remaining Jews. And so, and this is the Bukhara of today that we're going to see ourselves with our eyes. So I I took this picture just a few days ago. Just all around you in Bukhara, you have remnants of our stories. This is actually in Samarkand. We have uh, we have the madrasas, which is the system of teaching. I spoke to you about the Ibn Sina's madrasa, his school that he set up. When you want to graduate as a physician, let's say, medicine, philosophy, math, geometry, they're all taught to you, and as well as the dissection was forbidden by Islamic law, but you could dissect the dissection of humans. You could dissect pigs or other animals to understand the human anatomy. It was an actual school set up. In fact, many people believe that, and when you graduated as a physician, as a doctor, they'd put a robe on you, and you were given a copy of the Quran, even if you were Christian or Jewish as well, with a special bookmark as a prize, and this meant you graduated. And people believe, some people actually believe, I think it could be true, that the graduates of today, the whole system with the robes and the hat with the tassel, is a kind of a throwback to that time. So really, if I have to point to today's lecture, So I wanted you to understand that Jews with their connection to Uzbekistan, Bukhara, Samarkand, etc., is part and parcel with the Silk Road, and also incredibly interconnected with the story of the Jews elsewhere. We spoke about the rise of Islam with Hellenism that influenced the Jews of Uzbekistan and Samarkand. We have Babylon, where they were exiled to and then left, and we have just all these influences throughout the millennia and centuries, and and this echo with Rambam, with Maimonides, who came from Cordova and fled to Fez and set up his and actually taught at a university there. This is our story, and it's a story that I would love to share with you when I travel there with Ayelet in the near future. At this point, I'm gonna stop my share, take some questions.
All right, Dr. Mendelsohn, thank you for your presentation. I know, I'm sure we'll have lots of questions, people coming in. It's really an incredible story, and there's so much to it. A lot of different time periods that we went through, and we laughed, we cried, we made it to the end. All right, before we get to the Q&A, of course, everybody, if you'd like to, you can put questions into the Q&A. We'll get to as many as we can. I just want to share my screen for a moment to remind folks of a few things that we have coming up. Of course, next week we'll be back together as part of Scholar-Palooza with Yael Strom and Elizabeth Schwartz. They've got an upcoming trip to Greece, and they'll be talking about Greece from a musical perspective. Then we take a week off for Rosh Hashanah, and we'll be back together with Professor Stephen Burke on September 30th. He's going to be talking about Shum, the Shum cities. If you don't know what those are, well, you're going to find out on September 30th. You're going to learn all about it. Professor Burke is going to be leading a trip down the Rhine River, a cruise down the Rhine River in the summer of 2026, and that is already filling very quickly. You can find out information about that on our website. Just so people have the info, of course, Dr. Mendelsohn is going to be not just going to Uzbekistan, we'll show that in a second, but leading a trip to Morocco this coming March. If you're interested, if you know others that might be, it's really an incredible trip, enhanced by the high level of scholarship that you've experienced with Dr. Mendelsohn this evening, focused on the history, both Jewish and otherwise, in Morocco. As he and I were on a program together last week, where we were talking about the Jewish experience there, really as an indigenous people. It's really incredible. Yeah. And then in May, as we were just talking about, Dr. Mendelsohn will be in Uzbekistan. So you can check out information about both of these trips and everything else, of course, on our website. Lots going on. And once this program is over, we're going to take a break for all of the Chagim, Rosh Hashanah through Sukkot. And then we're going to be back with a program with Ralph Nurenberger, who's doing a 4-part series called Fact, Fiction, and Fallout, Turning Points in Jewish Memory. Should be very interesting if you were with us with Ralph Nurenberger. Last year, he did a very interesting 4-part series. And he's a compelling speaker, so I encourage everybody to check it out. Again, all the information for that is on our website, along with lots of other trips. So you got lots of opportunities to connect with us virtually and in person in the year ahead. That ends the commercial segment of our program here, and we can go to the Q&A. Lots of questions already coming in. Let's see what we've got. Let's start with one from our friend Barbara Hirsch. Barbara writes in, can you comment on how these Jews in Uzbekistan understood their identities as Jews and what their Jewish practices looked like? Thank you for the interesting presentation.
First of all, you're welcome. I enjoyed it very much. The Bukharian Jewish practices, they're very aware of the fact that they contain so many elements. The elements of Babylonian Judaism, which resembles Judaism as we know it from the Talmud, etc. It followed Talmudic law. They're always Jews as we know it, but they had their own piyutim, their own type of songs and poetry, but and they had their own language. This mixture of Persian and Judaism mixed with the Uzbek kind of dialect. But then, as I said to you, they started to integrate other ideas when they started becoming when under the time of oppression, when they started to crumble as a cohesive community, a Sephardic rabbi came along and basically he taught them the Sephardic traditions. So they started to incorporate that as well, but they never left the other ones behind. Ashkenazi elements came in as well. Again, they adapted, acculturated, assimilated, but never left the other ones around. A distinct Bukharian Judaism developed and still exists, and it's both incredibly unique, but also extremely Jewish. There's no elements of it that you would not recognize as its own unique form of Judaism.
If you went for services, you think you could follow along if you're
Absolutely, and I actually have a clip here of me sitting with her cousin. You would totally understand every word. There'd be no confusion. It sounds Sephardic now because of this adaptation to the Sephardic traditions.
Got it. So a related question from David Goldstein. Are the Torah scrolls in Uzbekistan stored in cylindrical canisters? And is there anything unique about the way the Torahs are decorated?
Let me think. First of all, they're in the what you might recognize as this kind of cylindrical as a canister. They're called the teak. Um, and this was meant to preserve the Torah. Sometimes they actually have inside of it a linen that's rolled with it to protect the ink. So that's one of the unique aspects. But otherwise, the parochet and the decorations of the Torah with the rimonim and everything, it's as you would expect. It's so in that way they're a bit unique. Tikim are always unique to every congregation that uses them, every Jewish community. The idea of the canister, they're painted differently. The ones in Salonika, for example, that have a very interesting, also this Silk Road connection, are very ornately painted, and each one is different and unique. These ones are more bejeweled and decorated. There are a lot of artisans, so you see a lot of jewelry of all kinds decorating these ones.
Okay, let's talk about linguistics for a minute. Marlene Stern would like to know, do the Jews of Uzbekistan have a, quote, secret language?
Yeah, it's isn't it fascinating that Jews always seem to develop their own language. It's we have the Jews of Baku in Azerbaijan. They have their own Judeo Mountain Jewish dialect. That's this mixture of Turkish and Hebrew. The Bukharian Jews have their own unique language, a mixture of so many dialects that actually come in there. You have Persian, lots of Hebrew, a smattering, I believe, of Slavic words, and it's this and it's a when you listen to it, I'm a linguist. I haven't made a careful study of it yet, but I've noticed that the languages I understand, I can actually pull out some Hebrew and some of the Slavic words. My Persian is non-existent, but yes, it's definitely a fascinating language to study. I would love to.
So we have several people that wrote in some interesting personal experiences. Hope Meisner writes in that in 1990, she and Benny, her late husband, Cantor Benny Meisner, were actually sent to Samarkand by Soviet Jewry movement. They were really suffering for having been cut off from the Jewish world for so long, which helps to explain partially why so many chose to leave. There's a related question from Miriam Bacharach. I think you had said the answer, but we can repeat, asking how many Jews still remain in Uzbekistan?
Overall, I see about 500. I think I see about 150 in Bukhara itself. I believe it might even be 100.
And are there, I mean, are these all only old timers, or are there some families and youngsters?
They do have younger people there. They even have a young Jewish school. I met quite a few. I didn't talk about the food, the amazing food you eat there, the plov and everything. There's local Jewish varieties of every type of cuisine, and I really gained a lot of weight. In Kyrgyzstan, the food is okay. It's mostly a lot of salads and fish and meat. In Uzbekistan, it's really varied. This plov, which is this delicious rice pilaf with vegetables. Every culture you go throughout Uzbekistan has their own type of plov, and the Jews have their own cooking, features heavily with raisins and all kinds of berries cooked with the meats. It's very unique, and I thoroughly, it's something to experience.
Sounds delicious.
One of the languages I didn't add that I heard in their language is also Aramaic. They have a lot of Aramaic in their language as well, which would make sense.
Okay. Another personal question from Norman Green, who writes, I had a friend originally from Poland who, with her mother, were sent by the Soviets to Uzbekistan to survive. Was this very unusual?
Soviets, anything they did was not unusual. They did all kinds of crazy stuff, especially when it came to Jews, as you know, that beyond, about the stories of the Pale. Soviets did all kinds of crazy stuff, but they definitely would transplant in the same system as you see the the Romans did and the Ottomans did. They would transplant different people's families, entire communities to other places willy-nilly. So whatever, I'm sure that by transplanting this Polish family, they had a reason behind it. It might be they had a certain skill that was needed, a certain artisan or uh, business acumen, something. There was a reason why they would have put it in one place or the other, perhaps even exile. But there's that would be a wonderful story to inquire of to get to find out why. I would love to know myself. Now that you've told me, the scholar in me wants, there was a story behind it. They had a skill, or they were being punished for specifically for something. It was one or the other.
So, and very related to that, I've got one more for you that you may not know, but might want to research after. It's very interesting. From Susan Sorkin, who writes, my great aunt married the owner of a cotton plantation in Tashkent, Ichia Polak. The Bolsheviks allowed him to run it because his children were socialist sympathizers, and after the revolution, gave him an apartment in Moscow. Do you know anything about him or such situations?
I've heard similar stories, but I would love to know about that story. If somehow we can connect, what was the name? Susan?
Susan Sorkin. So Susan, if you email me, I'll connect you with Dr.
Yes,
Mendelsohn.
I would love to be connected with that story. I'd like because I've heard two similar stories now, and I'd like to find out more. It would actually be an interesting session into itself. An interesting. I would love to know more. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I was interested when you said after the 1917 revolution, the Jews of Uzbekistan kind of were welcoming to that this maybe things will be better. Didn't work out so great, but at least at the beginning they were open to it. Um, okay, a few more, and then we'll start to wrap up here. Rabbi Henry Zub. I mean, you talked about this a little bit, but maybe we can discuss a little further. We're going way back. Rabbi Zub would like to know how and when did the exiles from Jerusalem end up in Uzbekistan?
So that's first of all, they say it was when Cyrus the Great himself actually allowed the Jews to return, or even before his time, when the Jews started to gain their after the initial shock of exile had worn off, when they started to become a people in their own rights, accepted with their own habits, customs, and they themselves start to move. And along with the route of the Silk Road. That's why I use the Silk Road as my theme throughout the lecture, because so they themselves during this time period started to set up communities of trade along with schools. They imported the whole idea of the synagogue and yeshivot with them, and that they believe those are the earliest traces that we see. I can't answer the rabbi with great certainty, but this is what they say about themselves. This is their own story. And the fact that they have so much, that's why I mentioned Aramaic before. The fact that they have so much Aramaic in their dialect uh, shows they had a very strong affinity to the language. It's even more, most Hebrew dialects that develop is the local dialect with Hebrew. This is the local dialect with Aramaic and Hebrew.
Wow. All right, we've got a couple questions in here that you could write a dissertation on. So, but
Yeah.
before we get to those, and then we'll wrap up. I've got one from Eugenie Stahl, who writes in that Eugenie lives in Forest Hills, New York, where they have a large Bukharian Jewish enclave, and just wondering why so many Uzbekistanis settled in that particular area.
First of all, New York is the main destination other than Israel for Bukharian Jews. As the question as to why they've the one I think it's not a satisfactory answer, so I will have to get back to. I'll have to actually examine it more deeply myself. I don't know. I don't know the actual historical reason. The ones who moved to New York and told me that it was the first stop from that you got off at, and they were successful there. They set up a good parnasa for themselves, a good livelihood, and they would bring in their own other family members, and it grew. almost the same rate uh, as the communities that were moving to Israel moved. But they didn't. But because also it's the Islamic custom, you don't move far from your home. Parents don't like to leave. Children don't like to leave far from their parents. So wherever you'd set up a community, they said they would just stay and continue to grow there. So New York became one place, and Israel became the other. There was not, you don't see much more of a diaspora than that. But that's not it for me. That's not satisfactory. That's what I can come with at the moment. I'll try and find out more for you when we go together.
Sure. All right. Couple more. We're going to wrap this up. This is, like I said, these are both questions that you could talk for an hour, no problem, but we won't do that. Tamar Jaffe writes in, when did Islam become extreme to the point where they didn't tolerate others?
Yeah, I love the question. You know the expression in Hebrew in Exodus, they say, um, and Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. Vayimut Yosef v'kol achav v'kol adorahu. And the next line is, Vayakam melech chadash shelo yadat Yosef. A new king arose who did not know Joseph. What happened in Islam is this initial euphoria under the Islamic age with the first few caliphs. They kind of had this impetus of, we want scholarship, we want learning, we want knowledge, and eventually you had these clerics, these Muslim clerics, that suddenly started to reinterpret the Quran and actually have a much more extreme version where they said, we don't want this kind of thought. We don't want this idea of philosophy. We don't want Sufism that talks about this greater power other than God. Doesn't even talk about Muhammad. And you have them turning back to the Quran and the Hadith, and you get this kind of extremist version that starts to oppress people, starts to oppress non-Muslims. And you see this happen in waves. In Morocco, for instance, you have periods of time in Morocco where the Jews thrive and become, as I said, great physicians, chief advisor to the king, etc. And then you have times when the Islamic dynasty gets overthrown and an oppressive one like the Almohads start. And the same thing happened in Uzbekistan when the Shiites actually replaced the Sunnis. And you had this. So it was almost, the answer is why and when. It was arbitrary, number one. Number two, what really happened is this concept of something called jahiliya, which is called in Islam means a return to ignorance. So jahiliya in modern day terms for Muslims means the idea that if you do something that's not pure religious Islamic practice, like worshiping 5 times a day, exposing yourself to secular thoughts, then you're not a good Muslim. And that kind of created this type of Wahhabism, which means, or Salafism actually. Wahhab is a specific person. Salafism, which is a return. It's called a return to the ancestors' way. And this intolerance happened as a result of insecurities, of this vacuum when the Arab world or the Muslim world was searching for some kind of answer. First, the pan-Arabism, they hope would be the answer, embracing secularism. When that didn't work, you had pan-Islamism. And so pan-Islamism became increasingly intolerant of other ways of thinking. And that's why you see it in its form the way it is today. So as you said, if there's a thesis in the question, I tried to pack a few different reasons why you might have seen this.
And there's always, I know in various religions, there's after a certain period of time, there's a period of enlightenment where maybe they move kind of beyond that maybe it's coming. We'll see. All right, one more. We're going to wrap it up here. John Winninger, who often asks some very challenging questions in these programs. John writes in, can you explain how ideas were shared between Muslims, Christians, and Jews in Spain, and how each culture expanded by learning from the other? Again, like a dissertation thesis here.
That question is totally interrelated with the other question we just had. It could almost be the same question. So it actually also relates to Maimonides. When Maimonides, so let's go back to when Islam rules Spain, Andalusia, they eventually cross over into North Africa, and they conquer. We had this lecture last week, right, Jeff? They conquer the local Berbers, the Amazigh, And when they convert them to Islam forcibly, the Amazigh create their own dynasty that becomes so oppressive. Uh, and first of all, some of them are not. There's several dynasties, and they in turn conquer back, and they conquer Spain backwards the other way, and they impose their rule. And with that, they bring all kinds of Amazigh ideas, Berber ideas, their geometry, their artwork, their way of this new mingling of philosophy and ideas. At the same time, this is getting to your question. You have the expulsion from Spain of the Jews in 1492, and you have many Spanish Jews bringing this ideas of enlightened ideas of Islam we spoke about, enlightened ideas coming from the Christian world, and you have it penetrating back to through Spain back into Morocco, and Jewish people, especially the Sephardic Jews, are now possessors of Arabic, Spanish, many other languages, and you get this transmission of culture, as you said, as you asked, between Muslim, Jew, and Christian, and you get this incredibly powerful wave of a kind of an enlightenment. And actually, it takes the Jews of Shum. You spoke about the exploration of Shum. It takes them several generations longer to reach any enlightenment, that kind of enlightenment that happens over this time period. So it's so that, as I said, you said, it's a dissertation question, but it's a wonderful question. The more you explore it, the more excited you'll be. The more excited I get.
Yeah. Well, for everyone out there, these are the kind of conversations that you have if you have the opportunity to travel with Dr. Mendelsohn on either of these upcoming trips, Morocco in March, Uzbekistan in May. Dr. Mendelsohn, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to enlighten us all this evening.
Thank you all for those questions. It really it makes it worthwhile. It is worthwhile anyway, but those questions so much enrich the experience. I thank you all.
Yeah, we have an incredible virtual community, really, that come to these programs. So thank you all. We will see you again next week, same time, same place, same link. Until then, wish everyone a very good week, and shalom.